All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Thomas Knecht. I'm the campaign manager for Kendall Qualls, the Republican candidate for Congress in Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. So just a disclaimer off the bat, this is not a political discussion. This is both for the audience and Kendall. So Kendall, kind of stick to your business career and startup, and especially don't ask for money. So on that end, Kendall, I don't know if you want to take it away or just tell us a bit about your background and how you got started in the healthcare industry.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm glad to do this and happy to discuss, the healthcare, which is really central in everyone's mind right now, not just for just the cost and the complications of it, but obviously it's vital in everyone's life from birth to all the way into the end stage of life. Very fortunate. After I served in the military, I was 5 years as a field artillery officer.
If you could start, but before that, so your young career, if you want, so Harlem to healthcare. So how did you get from Harlem to healthcare?
Oh, okay. Well, you didn't ask me that. Well, yeah, sure. So a little bit different. I took a different path in life, and it's like all things. The things that you go through, the tough things you go through in life, makes you stronger. Unfortunately, when my father returned from Vietnam, my parents divorced. And we moved from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is home of the 101st Airborne. And from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, my mother and my 4 siblings moved to my grandparents' apartment in Harlem, New York. Now, this is in the late 1960s when things were at its worst. It was an epicenter for drugs, violence, and gangs. If you want to know what it's like to live in a place that's defunded with the police, or the police defunded and there's little officers available, I can tell you what it looks like. It's not a pretty sight. It's not a way to live. In fact, the first day we arrived, a block away from our grandparents' apartment, we were held up, broad daylight. The thief took all the money my mom had. We still had our luggage in hand and everything. So that was day one for us. My mother really wanted the best for us. She just wanted to be a mom to raise her children, have a better life than her own. And unfortunately, things were not going the way she had dreamed about for her family. My older brothers and sisters were getting absorbed into the street culture of Harlem. So my father came and got me and my younger brother to live with him. Now, my father was still on active duty. He was a drill sergeant in the Army. And because he was paying alimony and child support, all he could afford was a small trailer in a trailer park in Oklahoma. So that was my start in life. I've been called trailer trash, ghetto kid, and a lot worse. But the neat thing about our country is where you start in life does not necessarily mean that's where you have to stay in life. And that pathway for me was through education. I worked full-time in high school and college to pay for my college degree. I was in the Army Reserves in college. And after I graduated, I served our country on active duty as an Army artillery officer. I served here stateside as well as in South Korea, right on the DMZ. But I wanted a different kind of life, career life from that my father had. And I after an honorable discharge, I started my career with Johnson & Johnson on the pharmaceutical side of their business, starting sales management. And along the way, I earned a graduate degree, a master's in business administration, MBA. And I got promoted to the home office in marketing and wind up leading that marketing team for one of our strategic brands after 4 years of being on that marketing team. And the home office happened to coincide with a couple of things. Number one, it was in New Jersey, right on the East Coast, we were an hour away from New York City. And what's so interesting is that I was the longest tenured team member of that marketing team when we launched that brand. From $0, from nothing, to $1 billion. It was a huge, tremendous breakthrough in medicine. There's anti-infective and antibiotic for the hospital, as well as the outpatient setting. And we grew it to $1 billion. And here's this guy that has a $90 million budget that I'm managing, developing strategic plans for a team of over 2,000 people across the country, as well as global teams in Japan, that one of our partners, strategic partners, was a Japanese company, Daiichi, out of Tokyo, as well as our team in Europe. And here's this kid that's managing this global brand, and I'm less than an hour away from the place where we were held up as a kid, from when we moved from Fort Campbell, Kentucky to Harlem. I'm less than an hour away as I'm managing this job with Johnson & Johnson, and where I started so many years ago as that kid in Harlem. And this only can take place in the United States. So I wanted just to reference that, just speak how great of a country this is, and chances you have in this country to move beyond your circumstances. So a lot of experience on the pharmaceutical side. I made a transition to the med tech side in halfway in my career, starting with a laboratory company back in Dickinson, and then later with Covidien, one of the top 10 med device companies. A few years later, Medtronic acquired Covidien, and I was working with Covidien in Boulder. I was heading up the marketing team for one of their business units. At first, I had responsibility for $650 million portfolio of really innovative med technologies. And then my role expanded to $800 million book of business with Covidien / Medtronic. And then later I was recruited to come to Minneapolis and with a global responsibility for marketing for one of their business units. So pretty in-depth and broad experience in the medical device as well as med pharma industry. And then just to coincide that, cap that off, I spent 2 years on the board of directors for a community hospital, 300-bed community hospital in Metro New York as well. So just really have a good background and understanding not only the applications to help improve lives, but also the business of healthcare and how that relates to not only companies that pay for these, employers that pay for these services, as well as the government agencies that pay for these services, but also patients who have to actually pay out of pocket for these services as well.
No, absolutely, that makes sense. And going back to that transition from pharma to med tech, can you talk a little bit, I guess, hey, how long were you in the pharmaceutical industry, and then why did you make the move toward the med tech side?
Yeah, so here's one of the things about the pharmaceutical industry. Unfortunately, they really kind of lost their way. It was heavy promotion with physicians, and they lost the education component of what we really aspired to. When I was early on in my career, I believe, heavy too much into promotion. If I would change it, I would even dispense with the commercial TV ads that they have for some of their medications. But with that said, what I found is that with the introduction of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, it changed a lot, especially for the med tech industry, how their go-to-market strategies. So their go-to-market strategies was a heavy emphasis on their sales organizations, whereas in the pharma industry was a heavy emphasis on marketing and data and strategic analysis. Mm-hmm. I would say not so much so on the med tech side. On the med tech side, I made that transition because my experiences could help. And starting at that point, I was on the pharma side for about 12 to 13 years. And then on the med tech side, just under 10 years. And so what I did was I helped with a lot of businesses that were either stagnant or declining, because the emphasis was just on sales volume and just, new technologies, new widgets, if you will, mm-hmm. and really driving those through the surgeons and through the hospitals, and really not necessarily understanding what was not only the clinical value of those technologies, but what was the economic value for the hospital system and the patients. A lot of that work on quantifying outcome data as well as economic value was not really captured because they didn't really need to before. They had a system that worked well with their go-to-market sales strategy. And so there really wasn't a need to quantify a lot of the economic as well as clinical value. There was some, obviously, they need to have some clinical value to get the FDA approval and to make a compelling selling message. But initially, there wasn't a long-term strategy to continue to develop and reinforce those that value. And that's predominantly what I did to help these organizations capture the value of their technology, have a different message, not only to the end user, the surgeons, but also to the hospital administrators and the chief medical officers, where we really focused on outcome value, that's clinical outcome as well as economic outcome value for the entire healthcare system.
So just to build that out a little bit, so it's safe to say you took these strategies of kind of providing the clinical value, typically they was applied to pharma, and applied that to the medical device industry and explaining into how to turn around business units. Is that correct? Or
yes, yeah, absolutely. So again, it's combining the clinical value as well as the economic component. And here's the other part. This is something that's really, really critical. So when I came into the med device side, I found a tremendous amount of technologies that provided significant value, both economic and clinical, to patients, to hospitals, to physicians. But here's the problem. You think about an operating room, it's much like airline industry, where you have the pilots, they have their checks, their safety checks before they get on the plane, and all of the things that they do in the cockpit. And there's a standard procedure, say standard operating procedure, protocols of what you do for each of these surgical procedures that they do. That's the surgeons, the physicians, the nurses, even the tech staff. Everyone has their assigned role to make those procedures efficient and safe and positive outcomes. Whenever you have a new technology, it disrupts that flow. It disrupts that. So if you think about our company has some great new technologies, literally breakthrough technologies that were adopted in 30% of hospitals around the country. And I just thought that was fascinating. We had one technology, for example, significant outcomes, reduced surgical complications, documented clinical studies. But what happens is, if you don't get that training on how to use that technology as a surgical resident in your training, you're less likely to adopt that type of technology when you go to full-time practice once you leave your training, your residency, and your medical school. So anything that comes in post that training, it's hard to integrate, because they didn't get the initial training when they were in the training. And to do that in a broad perspective, it's time consuming. The outcomes are variable. And so the adoption rates are not as high as you would think they would be, because of the benefit of the technology. Now, I want you to think about that just for a minute. That's just one company. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of companies coming out with new technologies, new ways of doing things. And let's just say 50% of them were effective and cost saving and better outcomes. Just think about the disruption for these surgical units and for these hospitals and surgeons to have to learn something new that comes around every week. How do they absorb that into a practice, into a system that they can actually do it at a high rate of effectiveness, and to ensure that they get the positive outcomes? So there's a dynamic of consistency and performance, as well as adopting new technologies, and they're constantly bombarded with new things literally every week, from the big legacy companies as well as the small startups.
So obviously, I'm assuming from your job, sounds like messaging was an important. Hey, how do we get the messaging right from the clinical studies to our staff, and how do we get that to the doctors and the end users? Is that correct?
How do we get that to the doctors and users? But what is it, an increment? So think about that last answer I just gave. You get literally thousands of new ideas, new things coming at you. Our compelling message, our compelling value proposition has to be so high and above what the masses were coming to the market with. How easy it was to adopt, and then the uniformity of the adoption rates that we're getting. So not just the end users, but do we have alignment with the chief financial officers of the hospital system, the chief medical officers, the chief nursing officers, because there needs to be enough buy-in on some type of adoption of some type of technology, that it, again, that would have more than just incremental value, because you're really disrupting the flow, the patient flow, the workflow for all of these highly trained professionals.
No, absolutely. Now, moving ahead a little bit towards the end so you had, 25-year career, corporate healthcare, close to that. What made you sort of make the move to a startup, and then talk a little about the particular startup you're working on?
Sure. So all throughout my career, it's been very interesting. I've been very fortunate. Even when I started on the ground floor, I've always been involved in launching new brands and integrating those brands where they become standard of care. And that takes a high degree of education and then the ability to communicate that value in a way that lends credibility to not only myself, but also the technology and what we're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so as my career progressed, from launching these things myself and working with really some of the highest trained individuals in the world, not only physicians, but specialists, pulmonologists, infectious disease specialists, critical care physicians, all of these guys, working with these guys, developing that degree of trust, credibility. It was fascinating. I enjoyed it. So it wasn't just the standard of care, just the monitoring, making the wheels go around in a big corporation. It was being on the cutting edge of the leading innovative things that I really enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of that natural selection, if you will. That's how I got involved in it. So as my roles expanded, I was not only actually doing it myself, but teaching now sales organizations, now mm-hmm. heading up marketing, basically developed a whole strategy for the entire organization to execute. We had at one time over 3,000 people involved in our business unit, executing strategies around some of these new innovations that we were bringing to the market. Mm-hmm. What I liked about MedTech it's very interesting. I tell you, it is literally Silicon Valley for medicine, the MedTech industry in the United States. It's absolutely fascinating. But again, the complication is the improvement so much more so. Is it worth the disruption of workflow, patient flow to train physicians to use the technology? Mm-hmm. Because any incremental additions, it's not going to be worth the time and effort, because there's always an opportunity cost of disrupting current patient flow and safety in hospitals. So what really got me involved in this was I saw the benefit of what these technologies could do.
What's the name of the company, the startup?
So the startup I'm in right now is called Potentia Metrics.
Okay.
So it's the idea of potential without the L, metrics. And so the company is a spin out of WashU Medical School in St. Louis, one of the top 10 medical schools in the country. And the founder of the company, what happened to him, this is personal in effect. His father was diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer. And his father was 74 years old at the time he was diagnosed, just finished a 5-mile run. And when he got diagnosed with the metastatic prostate, they went through the standard protocols of what they should be given, what patients should be given at his age and his diagnosis. Now, what's interesting, that standard protocol is no longer the standard protocol. And unfortunately, as a result of taking the treatment recommendations, his father died from the side effects of treatment, not from actually the cancer itself.
And what was the treatment? Was it chemo?
It was all the above. It was chemotherapy, radiation, he had surgery. At the time, he did not have surgery because it had spread. And he had, I think it was hormone therapy as well. Mm-hmm. But what it did, these treatments obviously have their own side effects, just like any medication. And based on what had happened and from radiation as well as the chemo, he wound up being in a hospital 6 months out of his 10 months of his last year of survival. Mm-hmm. And it was traumatic for me. It just changed quite a bit. And so as a result of that, he wanted to start a company that would help patients, help families make the best decisions on treatment options for patients that are diagnosed with cancer. And so we're a data analytics, AI, artificial intelligence company. We have one of the largest databases of longitudinal databases of cancer patients in the country. And we're able to give patients an idea of for patients similar to them, their demographic, their same diagnosis, whether they have type 2 diabetes or not, or whatever conditions they have, for similar patients, what were their outcomes based on the treatment options of chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, and a combination thereof. So they can have this information to have a more informed discussion with their physicians and surgeons when they make their treatment options for themselves.
Now, how did you get involved in this? I'm assuming there's a lot of people out there kind of working in corporate, and after a while, they're like, I don't know, maybe try something different. So how did you find this startup? Was this something you saw on LinkedIn and submitted your resume? Did you know the person? Can you explain that a little bit and talk about the transition itself for people who are currently in corporate and how they move to that? So I'm assuming it's a little riskier, you know?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. So after I spent, 11 years at Johnson & Johnson, actually, I was recruited to a data analytics company. So this was before they had the cloud. Yeah, and no, there was a time. And before they had the term big data. I was doing that after 10 years after J&J, and we were using devices that no longer even exist anymore. Palm Pilots. And this was before the even iPhone. So we were actually doing data collection in there. So I kind of had a sense for this side of the startup world. In fact, I was recruited by two venture capital firms out of Boston to lead the marketing team for that startup firm back then. Now, like a lot of startup firms, it didn't work out. I think more than anything, we were ahead of our time, kind of say. And so I got recruited back into another company and farmed and led a marketing team from there. But at this particular point in my career, I had different choices to look at. After my time with Medtronic at a particular time, it was, hey, am I going to stay in big companies to continue to really manage brands and legacy brands, or I had gotten a call, to answer your question. I got a call from this firm. They had been around for 5 or 6 years by the founders and all the technology guys. They didn't have someone to help commercialize the process, who have been through startups and help change agents, if you will, adopt new technologies. And that's something I've done in my entire career. So I was fascinated by the technologies. It's a huge, huge patient, I would say, value, just the public value. And because one of the problems we're solving is that anywhere from 20 to 30% of people that are diagnosed with cancer will get a treatment that provides little to no value. And for me, that's just egregious. There's one thing about taking aspirin. If it's not working, you have side effects, you can stop taking it. But to go through chemotherapy or radiation or surgery, and I mean, these are tough procedures to go through. And for them to provide little to no value, I think we can do better as a country and better the healthcare system. And we can do that with informed information, with data that gives us better informed information, and it empowers the patient to make those decisions with the doctor, their personal doctor, as well as their family members. And Thomas, I'll give you a quick example. There was a study a few years back that looked at early breast cancer patients. They took a cohort of women, early breast cancer. One had surgery only, one cohort surgery only. One cohort of women had chemotherapy and surgery. And after 5 years of tracking them, they found the patients with surgery only, no chemotherapy, had similar outcomes as the patients that had chemotherapy. Now, that was actually, that was written up, obviously, in the medical journals, but it was such a big revelation, it actually made it in the Wall Street Journal, 2018, January of 2018. And here's a quote from Dr. Stephen Katz, University of Michigan School of Medicine. He said there were literally tens of thousands of women that received chemo they didn't need, radiation they didn't need, and surgery they didn't need. And our company helps address that issue, not just for breast cancer, but for basically 80% of the solid tumor cancers diagnosed in the country.
No, absolutely. I guess there's a lot to take in there on that end. So obviously that company is a a dire need for that. So we appreciate what you're doing there. But on a personal note, so what was going through your head when you're weighing the options, whether to make the move from corporate to the startup world, and what was sort of the risk analysis, and how did you ultimately decide, hey, I'm going to make the jump, and what kind of put you over the edge, sort of the tipping point, if you will, to leave kind of the safe confines of corporate America and do something that, while it has sort of that more high-end upside, there's some risk involved.
Well, you know what? Life is risk. I mean, when we get up, we don't know if that's going to be our last day in a car accident or anything. But here's the thing. Here's the thing I've always done. I've made decisions based on values of the company I work for, the values of the people I work for, and what value we bring to the marketplace. I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some great companies, Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic. These are classic companies that are very core, value-centric companies, and those they match up to my personal values. So the decision when I got the call and talked to these guys from Potential Metrics and what they wanted to do, what problem they were solving, man, this is almost a humanitarian achievement, and this is why capitalism works so great. We solve real problems in the marketplace that brings value to people. And obviously there's a financial value for our customers and a financial value for those people that bring those innovations to market. And yeah, the risk part, guess what? It may not work. That's life. And I'm a big boy, and we'll pick up and we'll move on and do other things. But at that time, I felt it was the best thing for us to do. And we had kids that were out of the house now, so it was a very different stage of life. So the mitigation of risk was very different from when I had small children.
And did you know anyone involved in the company before they called you, or they sort of just having a recruiter and just they identified you?
No, I did some work with some of the guys. In fact, the head of the company, I didn't even know about the cancer part of the business because they did healthcare analytics.
Oh,
so one of the businesses business units and products that I had responsibility for with Covidian, we had a product that actually lowered surgical complications so significantly that I felt, man, there got to be a better way we can get the broader usage. We had 30% of hospitals in the country using this product. It should have been nearly 70-80% based on the outcomes and the clinical studies that validated those outcomes. In fact, there's a hospital system in Pennsylvania. It's called UMPC, University Medical Center, Pennsylvania. University of Pennsylvania, UMPC. That's what it's referred to predominantly. But basically, it's standard care. They use it in every cardiac case. And what I found interesting is how could a premier hospital system like that use this device in every premier case, and then the hospital across the street never has it and never have it there. We need to have more standardization of good outcomes, and not just you're so lucky to appear to one hospital that that uses these advanced technologies. So what I did, I used this company because they had healthcare analytics capabilities. I used them to do an analysis on 10 hospitals that used our technologies, 10 hospitals that did not, and they were able to do a outcome and economic analysis that actually compared to surgical outcomes. And what it revealed was that when our technology was used, it doesn't make the surgeon a better surgeon or anything. What it does is an early alert system to let them know that there's something wrong with this patient and we need to do something to intervene. That early warning system of 5 to 10 minutes gives the surgical team enough time to make adjustments to the patient, to what they're doing, to fix blood desaturation, the blood oxygen desaturation from the brain and other vital organs. And so as a result, not only those patients have less renal failure, less stroke incidences and other factors, that report that I spent my budget for
Uh-huh.
actually got published in the Harvard Health Policy Review 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Actually, it was the front cover article.
Now, we're getting close to the end. If you could give one piece of advice to a young business person or an entrepreneur, what would it be?
Sure. There's a lot of technologies out there. Every medical center, every major school system has a tech transfer unit. And I said that those are solutions looking for a problem.
Uh-huh.
The biggest issue advice that I give to entrepreneurs, to the guys starting companies, was find out what problem are you trying to solve.
Uh-huh.
What's the problem you're trying to solve first before developing your solution.
I see. I think a lot of people are kind of want to say they want to have a product or a company, but there's no problem solving there. So we see that. So in closing, I guess is how obviously you are running for Congress. Anything else to learn people how they can learn more?
Sure. If they want to learn more about my new gig, they can go kendallforcongress.com, kendallforcongress.com, and the whole thing again about my career and even what I'm doing right now. It's about helping to solve problems for our country, so we can be this is always going to be a better place to live.
Okay. All right, Ken, that's all we have for today. So thank you, and I appreciate everyone who came in.
Thank you. Bye.